It takes a special sort to take on the grueling schedule and immense physical pain that comes with being a pro wrestler. However, there are some whose specialness exceed that of even Jules and are just straight up bonkers. It's no surprise then that those who make a point of going through barbed wire glass and an assortment of pointy household furniture aren't exactly the model professionals a family-friendly company like WWE are looking for. A particular handful of wrestling luminaries just weren't built for the bright lights of New York. The ones who did flirt with Vince's entertainment juggernaut found themselves watered down like lager at a school prom. I mean, Dean Ambrose does a move called the bloody wacky line. With that in mind, I'm Adam Wilborn from WhatCulture, and these are 10 wrestlers too unhinged for WWE. But before we begin, don't forget to subscribe to stay notified. Ding, ding, done. Number 10. SABU. Dubbed homicidal, genocidal, and suicidal for his willingness to sacrifice his body whilst punishing opponents, SABU probably knew he had a rep as one of the most chaotic wrestlers on the planet. Above all, SABU was violent. Really violent. The sort of violence where even Atsushi Onita tells you to tone it down a bit. His body was a mangled mess of bruises and broken bones, tattooed with scars acquired from years of crashing through tables and bouncing off barbed wire. A hardcore specialist, SABU resorted to extraordinary extremes to camouflage his deficiencies between the ropes. I mean, literally watch any episode of Botchamania. And it worked. Unfortunately, this would never fly as part of WWE's ECW revival. Completely knackered after years of damage, it was the worst possible time for the grizzled veteran to swap swinging chairs for suplexes. Overnight, a superstar once labelled extraordinary became simply ordinary. Number 9. BRUISER BRODY. BRUISER BRODY was a wild brawler and the godfather of what would eventually become hardcore wrestling. He also looked like the sort of person parents would scare their kids with stories about. During the height of his popularity, Brody did make the occasional appearance in the WWF, but as Vince Jr. gradually shifted the New York territory into a family-friendly affair, there was no longer any place for his savage tendencies. We had to make room for like this. Brody remained immensely popular elsewhere, working dozens of territories, including WCCW, Central States Wrestling, and the AWA, but despite his prominence, he could never conquer New York, missing out on the household recognition which came with the WWF's golden age. Not that he would have given a of course. Number 8. Abyss. Abyss is something akin to a modern-day Abdullah the Butcher, a menacing, despicable wrestler who will not hesitate in the slightest to pick up a barbed wire baseball bat or lay down a bed of thumbtacks to puncture his opponent. Nice. Unlike the Butcher, Abyss does have mainstream qualities, and there was no cutlery in sight. Hooray! He can also go between the ropes, as proved during his TNA tenure, despite you-know-who. But it was in more vicious settings where he really shined. Sadly for Joseph Park, his blood-stained resume has cost him the chance to spill claret on WWE's sterilised canvases. But a place down in Florida imparting his vast experience isn't beyond the realms of possibility. Number 7. The SANDMAN. The SANDMAN was one of the pillars of the original ECW, and appropriately enough, was quite an unstable one. A cane-swinging, beer-drinking, chain-smoking son of a gun, the hardcore icon was a sort of unrefined Stone Cold Steve Austin, minus the wrestling ability. Don't tell him I said that though. I bruise like a peach. Paul Heyman was a genius in drawing blood from a stone, and he got more than he bargained for with the foul-mouthed James Fullington, who soon became one of the most talked-about names in the industry. They almost certainly wanted to, but WWE simply couldn't ignore the Sandman as part of their 2006 ECW revival. Unfortunately, nostalgic fans got the censored version, the bland man, if you will, shorn of his Metallica entrance music and having kicked the ciggies. It wasn't the same, and left to his fundamentals, Sandman could never succeed. Number 6. Kevin Sullivan. Dependent on the time and place, Kevin Sullivan's character ran the range from satanic too masochistic, and no, not the 50 Shades of Grey kind. It's no real surprise then that there was no room at WWE's Family Holiday Hotel for the Taskmaster, given his particular brand of pure evil. Sullivan was one of the first to introduce themes of the occult to the business, but it simply wasn't something suits in New York understood until The Undertaker's Too Spooky for You variety became a roaring success in the early 90s. Prior to that, Sullivan's, let's just say, unconventional method of storytelling, coupled with his dark, disturbing persona, proved far too crazy for WWF. Being so intimately involved with the running of WCW probably didn't help either. Just saying. Number 5. The original Sheik. In 2007, WWE recognized the influence of the late original Sheik Ed Farhat by inducting him into their Hall of Fame, where he's since been joined by legends like Coco Beware, the Bushwhackers, and Drew Carey. Anyway, ironically, the style of wrestling he pioneered was one that largely kept him off the company's television programs. An early exponent of the hardcore style, Sheik had just a handful of matches for Vince Sr. in the late 60s. His brutal style didn't allow him to sustain a long-term run in Stanford, but after his brief exposure, he spread his legacy further afield. First in hometown Detroit, and latterly in LA, where he engaged in a thrilling series of bloodbaths with future managerial great Freddie Blassie. The Sheik may have been a bit much for WWF, but unlike others mentioned here, he was never forced to water down his persona to thrive. Essentially, he paved the trail for all their future glories, albeit one that wouldn't lead to New York. Number 4. James Mitchell. Whether under the guise of the sinister minister, Father James Mitchell, or Daryl Van Horn, the long-term TNA manager's intellectual, compelling promos never failed to captivate. He looked and sounded like a proper creepy, which to him is no doubt a massive compliment. In Smoky Mountain Wrestling, he was liable to drop in the odd sexual reference that'd totally fly over the head of his employer, and in his more ecclesiastic roles as the minister and Father James Mitchell, religion was, surprise, a common theme. In fact, and given the way they operated, perhaps surprisingly, it was only WCW who could keep Mitchell subdued. WWE flirted with Mitchell only briefly as part of their ECW revival. Ultimately, his volatile sermons were just too on the edge for the company's liking. Number 3. Mick Foley. These days, Mick Foley is loved just as much for his affable personality as he is his much-celebrated in-ring career. Oh, Mick, you silly goose. Whatever shenanigans will you get up to next on Holy Foley? However, he went to war with Terry Funk, even going as far as to include explosives, and it soon became the stuff of tape-trading legend. Those who did manage to get hold of a super rare VHS would sit mesmerized by the sheer carnage unfolding before their eyes, the legacy of Cactus Jack growing as his body was cut to shreds. Upon his arrival in Stamford, the repackaged Mankind's hardcore tendencies gradually faded as Foley replaced the barbed wire and bats with pinpoint psychology. The cerebral take allowed him to show that there was so much more to him as a worker than believed, but he always had a bag of thumbtacks in his locker, just in case. Number 2. New Jack. We all knew he was making this list, and yet I'm still terrified to say his name. There was no scarier wrestler than New Jack throughout the 90s, notorious for slicing opponents open with quite the variety of bladed implements. During one unsavory incident, Jack infamously hacked open a jobber by the name of Eric Mass Transit Koulis with a surgical scalpel. Koulis, who had lied about his age, suffered 2 severed arteries and passed out from the blood loss. New Jack, though, was unrepentant, taking to the mic claiming, "I don't care if the motherfucker dies, he's white, and I don't like white people." As far as heel promos go, it's a corker, but it spoke volumes of Jack's unstable nature. Oh, and let's not forget when he admitted trying to kill Vic Grimes for injuries he suffered as a result of the latter's famous balcony botch at Living Dangerously 2000. Is it really any wonder Vince & Co. have never considered bringing him to WWE? Number 1. Abdullah the Butcher. A bloodthirsty brawler for whom a crowbar was more effective than an armbar, few characters provoked fear quite like the Butcher. Just look at his forehead. The things this man did with a fork, you would not believe. For Abdullah, it wasn't just an expedient for shoveling food into his mouth, although given his sizable frame, he probably did a lot of it. Well, I'm dead for saying that. It was a weapon with which to tear open his foes' foreheads. Any actual wrestling was completely off the plate. There's something admirable about making the most of what you have, and if what you have is shredding people open with cutlery, so be it. Across a career spanning a simply unbelievable 52 years, the Butcher made a ton of money with his trademark bad table manners, but never once at Vince McMahon's banquet. New York etiquette is just a bit more refined, it seems.
Gosh, can you believe that person said that about that particular video on that entry? I sure can't. But you should like, share and subscribe below anyway. And also, the people who made this video, they're right here. Go follow them and give them some love.